Greetings from the Jazz Cloud. I'm Richie Zellon, and in this lesson I want to teach you some fresh new ways of playing one of the most overplayed standards, Autumn Leaves. Don't get me wrong, it's a great tune, but after a while some of us want to explore alternate ways of getting through the changes. And that's why I've prepared this lesson in which I am going to show you how to reharmonize Autumn Leaves with a number of different harmonic resources. This, by the way, is going to double as a masterclass in applying the dominant tritone substitution principle. That's a mouthful. And we're going to do that in all its variations. So stick with me, because next I'm going to play you the final arrangement, and immediately after I will show you step by step the procedure I employed to go from the conventional changes of Autumn Leaves to what you are about to hear. Welcome back to the Jazz Guitar Channel, where I bring you weekly lessons on everything related to the art of playing jazz guitar, which occasionally contains some lousy jokes, which I've been told are worse than drinking warm beer in the middle of the Sahara. So now that you've been warned, I can get on with the lesson. And I'm assuming that if you're still with me, you either found the arrangement you heard to your liking and want to learn how I came up with the new changes, or you had a sudden craving for warm beer, which, depending on my mood today, as the lesson develops, I might or might not deliver. I said in the intro that this would double as a masterclass in applying the tritone substitution principle. So a quick review before we begin. First of all, a tritone is any interval of an augmented fourth or diminished fifth. For example, in C, an augmented fourth would be an F sharp, and a diminished fifth would be a G flat. Same pitch, using two alternative names depending on how and where it is used. So with that understanding, let me continue to say that the tritone substitution principle is meant to be applied exclusively to dominants. And this is in part due to the fact that dominant chords already contain a tritone between the major third and minor seventh. So when we exchange just the root of a given dominant for a new root, a tritone away, we end up with a new dominant. For example, let's take G7, which is comprised of G, B, D, and F, which in turn are the root, the major third, perfect fifth, and minor seventh. If we just exchange the root or G for its tritone, or D flat that is, we end up with a D flat 7, which is comprised of D flat, F, G, and C flat, which are its root, major third, diminished fifth, and minor seventh. Now, don't let the C flat throw you off. It is just an enharmonic spelling of the B, which we had in the original G7. I've got to be careful to call these intervals by their proper names because I hear the jazz police is patrolling my channel and they are a little on edge with everything that's going on lately. I think you know what I'm talking about. This lesson is very pro-tritone, which is already bad enough. Are you aware that the tritone was forbidden by the church in the Middle Ages? No, really. Just Google it. They actually believed it was the sound of the devil. And unfortunately, I live in a country where almost half of its population is still stuck in the Middle Ages. So those of us who believe tritones matter are not too popular. Sorry about that. Getting back to exchanging the G for the D flat 7. That is for those who are still with me. I want to add that unlike the original dominant, the resulting tritone substitution is always going to be a dominant 7 flat 5 chord or dominant 7 sharp 11 chord. So to conclude with the theory, you're probably wondering why this works in the context of an existing chord progression. Well, the easiest way to illustrate this is by reminding you of the authentic cadence, which takes place whenever a dominant chord or the 5/7 chord resolves a perfect fifth down to the tonic or a temporary tonic. So when a G7 resolves or is followed by a C chord, we have an authentic cadence in action. If we apply the tritone substitution principle to the G7 and use the D flat 7 instead, we are also seeing the authentic cadence in action, only that it is slightly disguised. Instead of resolving a perfect fifth down to the C, it resolves a half step down to it. So based on this, we observe that all substitute dominants resolve a minor second down to their target resolution chord. And with this information in mind, we are ready to analyze the first 4 measures of autumn leaves. Finally, eh? Just want to add that if you don't feel comfortable playing the chord melody to this arrangement, you can simply use these new changes to comp behind somebody who is playing the regular melody to autumn leaves, and it will also sound great. And here we have the first 4 measures. There are 2 ways of analyzing autumn leaves. That is, either as being in G major or E minor. I chose the latter because the tune really gravitates around and concludes in E minor. So if we analyze these 4 measures, we have a 2/5 resolving to the G major, which is the flat 3 major 7 in E minor, and on the 4th measure, a C major 7, which is the flat 6 major 7. Feel free to glance over at the chart of minor tonality chords for more info. So let's get down to business and reharmonize this sucker. And what we are going to do is backtrack using dominants from the C major 7 in the 4th measure all the way back to the 1st measure. So in the 3rd measure, instead of placing a G7 which resolves to C, let's place its substitute dominant or D flat 7 in the 2nd half. In harmonic analysis, we employ a dotted arrow to show dominant resolution a half step down, while we use a regular arrow to show its resolution a perfect fifth down. So having said that, let's continue. Even though in the second measure I can do the same and place the direct dominant of D flat, which is A flat, I am going to leave the D7 intact because I like how it is creating root motion and descending half steps all the way to the C. For the first measure, I can backtrack and place an A7, which resolves to D7, but I won't because there is a C in the melody, yet there is no C natural in an A7 chord. So what we do in these cases is check the substitute dominant of A, which is E flat 7. And its scale, by the way, is the Lydian dominant, which is made up of a root, the 2, the 3, sharp 4, 5, 6, and flat 7. And it happens to have a C in it. And I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but usually all substitute dominants, which are essentially dominant 7, sharp 11 chords, employ the Lydian dominant scale. So notice that I have a dominant chain in half steps, finally resolving to the C major 7. Now let's take this a step further and add the 2 minor 7 relative of each dominant to the first half of their respective measures. So we want to precede the D flat 7 with A flat minor 7, and presto, we have our first 2-5. And let's put a parenthesis around the 2-5. You see, the markup with arrows and parentheses here makes it easier to spot the reoccurring cadences in a tune. And as a result, we train our minds and ears to hear tunes in terms of short, familiar progressions instead of a bunch of isolated chords. Now let's precede the D7 with an A minor 7, and finally the E flat 7 with a B flat minor 7. We now have 3 sets of 2-5s descending in minor seconds before arriving to the target chord, which is C major 7. Notice how the dotted arrows jump over the 2 minor chords in each set of 2-5s. That's because these chords are not essential. The essence of the progression is made up of the dominant chords, which define a sense of tonality when resolving. Remember the authentic cadence. These added 2 minor 7s are just helper chords interpolated to help create additional motion and color. Kind of like the dressing on a salad. Well, okay, the mustard on a hot dog for you carnivores out there. Let's hear the chord melody. So let me play the original chord melody for these 4 measures to Autumn Leaves so you can hear the comparison. And I will do that for all the measures. And here's the reharmonized version.